Conference recording started, which means we are comfortably zoned in Alameda, California. You are with me, the Zigzag Man, and I am privileged to have as a guest a now very famous author, but a famous man in his own right, the voice of the Oakland Athletic baseball team, Mr. Ken Korach. Ken.
Yes, Alf, good to be with you.
All right, we're there and here, and I am so delighted for a number of reasons. First, you and I go way back to when you were first starting out in the baseball biz, back to Rohnert Park, California, and you were the announcer. If I'm not mistaken, that was your second announcing experience. Your first one was short-lived, and you did a full season in 1984.
Right. I started in the minor leagues. Actually, I started in Petaluma, California, doing high school games in 1980, and then had a chance to do about 25 games in the California League in Rohnert Park in 81, and then got hired full-time to do their games in 84. So that was my first full year of broadcasting professional baseball. And as you'll recall, because you were back there a lot, that was a fantastic team that sent several players to the big leagues and actually lost in the California League playoffs to the Modesto A's on a home run by Jose Canseco, if I recall.
Whoa, that was, and he and Ozzie, I think that was their first year in organized baseball, if I recall. Canseco. Ozzie was a pitcher at the time.
I don't remember that because I know he eventually became an outfielder, right? I mean, they both played in the outfield.
He did, but at first he started as a pitcher, and they say that's what really kind of delayed his career because obviously genetically they're pretty much alike, and that notwithstanding, those are wonderful years working your way up, and I want to jump right from there. We'll go forwards and then backwards. Right now, you're just coming off a year where the A's did wonderfully and fell just a little short yet again. Any hope?
Well, yeah, 96 wins in the regular season was awfully good, but disappointing end of the season for sure. Disappointing.
To me, the season represented the emergence of Sonny Gray, who is, I could see him as being another Hudson. I can see him as being a top of the rotation guy. His stuff notwithstanding, he's got that bulldog in him that you can recognize.
Well, and the Hudson comparisons, I think, are legitimate. We talked about that on the air quite a bit. You know, they both pitched, of course, in the SEC. Right-handed pitchers with great stuff, not real big, both around 6 feet tall, but extremely competitive. And if the A's hadn't felt that way about Sonny Gray, after all, he had pitched less than a half season in the big leagues, and they opted to start him in the 5th game of the playoff series against Verlander.
Absolutely, and he did not really disappoint. The game obviously didn't go as planned, but he was by no means not up for the task, and so he's my man with the A's from here on out. Anyway, I was very disappointed when they chose not to sign Hudson back then. I just, you and I were both Angel fans, if I recall, and it shows in your broadcast that you're very concerned about the Angels organization from the start. Tell me some of those players who played in that first year.
When I was doing the games in the California League?
Yeah, in California.
In 84, that was the Angels single-A club, and Mark McLemore played second base, who's still a very good friend, and is still in baseball doing pre- and post-game shows for the Rangers on TV, and it actually had a brief stint with the A's. They had Devon White in center field.
Very solid ball. Devon was incredibly fast.
And Devon White kind of redefined how I had to call a baseball game from the standpoint that, and he was just a kid. After all, this is single-A ball. I just couldn't assume that any ball that was hit to left center or center field or right center was going to fall in. I just had to condition myself to wait because he was such an amazing center fielder. So they had McLemore at second. They had Devon White in center field. They had Jack Howell, who actually had a nice career in the big leagues, playing at third base.
He struck out a lot, but he was a very solid third baseman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good defensive player, and they had a left-handed pitcher named Bob Kipper, who's still working in the minor leagues as a pitching coach. They had a catcher named Carl Nichols who played in the big leagues. So as you know,
I think they had Brian Price for a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Brian Price came up late, and Brian, of course, went to Cal and came, I believe, directly from Cal to play for that club during the second half of the season. Just got his first major league managing gig, as you know. Wonderful guy, and happens to be very close with Bob Melvin, the current A's manager.
Initially, they sent him to Salem, and he pitched like 1 or 2 games at Salem before coming in late to Rohnert Park. And I was the Topps guy, and I not only chased him up to Salem to try to sign him for his Topps contract because he was one of those sure miss, don't miss kind of guys. And I ended up having to come back to Rohnert Park for the second time in the year to catch him there, and I signed him to his original Topps contract, and it was at that ballpark. So
wonderfully nice man too, great guy, and I think he's one of those hot properties. And I think if he hadn't gotten the job with the Reds, I think other teams would have been interested in Brian as a manager this year.
Absolutely. A great choice. And, choices aren't made anymore. Like Matheny is a good example. Price is certainly a good example. They're hiring guys without necessarily the actual managerial experience, but people that they're trusting their humanity and their experience as leaders in the clubhouse and this, that, and the other thing, more than, managed here, managed there. Riding the bus, making the same mistakes 100 times over a year doesn't necessarily make you a great manager. And
Brad Ausmus gets his first big league managing job in 2014. I think Mike Matheny kind of set the tone. Now, if it hadn't worked for Matheny and the Cardinals, maybe we wouldn't see this trend. But I think he proved that if you're a good manager, you're a good baseball man. And I think the cliche about communication and that being so important, being a good communicator. But I think that's become extremely important in baseball managing. These guys deserve a shot. And I think maybe it's even better than it used to be when you had some of these guys who were recycled and teams were unwilling to take a chance on a guy who never had managed in the big leagues. That happens with a lot of broadcasters. There's a brief story in my book about Bill King about how when I was working in AAA and got the opportunity to interview for a job with the Chicago White Sox as the third man in their broadcast team, and the radio station in Chicago was dead set against hiring me, and it wasn't anything I had done personally. It was just they wanted someone with major league experience, and I think that really held true for a lot of managerial candidates. It was very hard for guys who were coaches and maybe AAA, AA managers to take that next step.
Well, if preparation has anything to do with it on your part, the way you handle a game and the facts that it must be what you learned, a lot of it, from the way Bill did it. I remember Bill talking about having a book that he'd carry with him of facts and index cards and writings about each team, each opponent, everybody in the division, in other divisions. And that's one off on you. And I think that's what it's preparation that does it. It prepares you for the calling of a game, for life itself, for getting ready.
Yeah, and I think in any endeavor, in any professional endeavor, whatever you're doing, I think preparing is extremely important. I think that lesson came when I was a kid listening to Bill. I was 44 when Bill and I started working together, and there were a lot of lessons certainly I learned from him, and he had a profound influence on me during the time that we worked together. But I think the most amazing thing for me was growing up listening to Bill. And I think even though I wasn't aware of how much time he was spending preparing, when I was listening to Bill do the Warriors in the 60s and then the Raiders in the 60s, but you could tell listening to Bill King how thorough he was. And so if you can imagine growing up listening to someone like that, that's where the influence, I think, of Bill King really developed for me. Back when I was just a kid listening to the games and tuning into the games late at night, maybe through the static and trying to pick up a Warrior game at night.
What a thrill it had to be for you to work with your hero. I mean, to have him be your mentor and to establish the relationship that you guys had. You guys really worked off each other, even when you were no longer a kid doing it. In other words, how many years did you work with Bill before he tragically passed
10 years,
away?
yeah. We started in 96, and Bill passed away right after the season ended in 2005. So we had 10 years together, and that followed 30 years literally of listening to Bill. So you're right. How many people have that opportunity? You work with one of your heroes after you've spent 3 decades listening to him.
And, you know, when you think back upon it all, I'll tell you who you can blame for it. You can blame your family for encouraging you and not stepping on your dream. When you were a kid, it was a pipe dream to say, I want to be a major league manager or a broadcaster. I want to follow that. There are an awful lot of fathers out there who would just simply say, nonsense to a dream like that. That's unrealistic. You can't do that. You can't be the voice of the Yankees. For instance, my father. That's ridiculous. You have to go into something that provides security. Well, you know, in one sense he's right. You do need security, but you got to follow your dream. And when somebody's there to not support you in that, it makes it tough. So tell me about the influence your dad had on you.
Well, thanks for asking, Ralph. He was, and my dad is still alive. He's 94 years of age. You talk about him on your broadcast a lot. Yeah, and one of the things is that because of the way things have proliferated with the media through XM radio, my dad can listen to the games at night in L.A. He lives in West Los Angeles. He's 94. He's doing great, knock on wood, and so he listens to the games at night. And that's another thing that has just been a huge thrill for me. And I was lucky because my dad was a coach. And so I imagine I went to my first game when I was 2 weeks old or 3 weeks old. Because he was a very successful high school and junior college football, not football, but high school and junior college baseball and basketball coach in Southern California. So for the entire time that I was a kid, I was going to games. And if it wasn't a game that my dad was coaching, we were at the Coliseum on a Saturday watching UCLA or watching USC or going to a baseball game or going to the Coliseum to watch the Dodgers play when they moved there in 1958. So I really grew up with it, and it was in my blood from the time that I was born.
Did you happen to be in the Coliseum when they lit the candles for Campy?
No, that was an exhibition game, I think. They had 93,000 people there. I was not there at that game. But they did what the Dodgers did because they had the Coliseum was so vast that because my dad was coaching in high school back then, they sent all the high school baseball coaches in Los Angeles a pass where literally he could take a guest with him to any of the games at the Coliseum. So we got these freebies from the Dodgers. So when I was a kid, we could go at any game we wanted to because they were just trying to put people in the seats because, as I said, they had better than 90,000 seats to fill.
All right. I don't know how I'm going to be able to incorporate it into this broadcast, but there was a very, very famous Danny Kaye thing about Miller, the Hilla, the Halla.
The Miller, Hilla, Halla, Hilla, Hallelujah twist.
Right, exactly. That was Danny Kaye, and that exemplified, we can't not talk about the early 60s and the Giants-Dodgers rivalry. You were a Dodger fan at that time.
Well, actually, I was much more of an Angels fan.
I was,
in terms of that real rooting interest, the emotional tie you have to a team, I was more of an Angels fan. Although we lived eventually, when the Angels moved to Anaheim in '66, they were so far away we never went to a game. I went to the first game the Angels actually played at Dodger Stadium in '62, and I'm really dating myself now, Ralph, but I actually went to several games in '61, the Angels' first year at Old Wrigley Field. My dad took me to see an entire series between the Angels and that great Yankee team in '61, but in terms of the emotional tie, I was much more of an Angel fan. But in terms of my interest in baseball, that really, a lot of it came from Vin Scully. So from listening to games and watching games, although the Dodgers only televised 9 games every year back then, those were the games in San Francisco. Vin Scully was the huge influence for me, and I think I'm not alone. I think almost everybody in my business considers Vinny to be a god.
And he is, and I remember his mentor when I grew up. I'll date myself. My grandfather took me to my first game in 1951. I got to see Willie. I got to see the Giants before they brought up Willie, and then the reconfigured Giants after they brought him up. And as a 5-year-old kid, I'm soaking all of this in. I got to see DiMaggio play his last year in 51. And I got to see Ebbets Field, where my grandfather's aunt lived right across the street on Bedford Avenue. And he asked me at the end of the year to choose which team you want to root for. He says, where'd you have more fun? And I said the Polo Grounds was more fun with Willie and that expanse of grass and what have you. So it leads me to my next question. When you grow up rooting for one team or another and you go into broadcasting, how can you remain just unbiased when you have preferences? Obviously now you're rooting for the A's. How do you stay objective? Is there anything you do? Do you have to check yourself once in a while and go, whoa?
No, not really. No, I don't want to sound jaded or callous or whatever the word might be, but I'm a professional broadcaster. And so whatever emotional ties that I might have had to certain teams when I was a kid, I think those go out the window when you do the games. And so the most important thing to me would be the sense of professionalism. So I don't have any conflict of interest. I mean, whatever ties I had to the Angels, that was long, long, long ago. Those are fond memories of being a big fan of their teams back in the 60s and early 70s. But I think all that gets peeled away when you get into the business and you realize that your credibility is the most important thing in the world. And you can't compromise your credibility. And so that's the one thing I've always tried to live by.
Well, that's one thing that you're appreciated for in the Bay Area is your credibility and those pipes. You can't rehearse those pipes of yours. That came early. That was inherited, obviously. When did you know you were going to be a baseball announcer? And when did you know you weren't going to be a professional golfer? Was that? Because you've got a reputation.
I was never going to be a professional golfer. There was no chance of that ever happening.
Really?
Yeah, no, I was never that good. I'm still not that good. I love golf, and a great friend of mine, Kelly Wolf, hired me for my first job in Northern California when he was the head golf professional at a municipal course in Santa Rosa, Bennett Valley, and I was his assistant. But I was never a pro. I was a 7 handicap. I worked in the pro shop. They called me the first assistant, but it really wouldn't be fair to all of the true golf professionals to say that I was in any shape or form a golf pro. I've always been a pretty good player, but never close to that. Never close to that level. Yeah.
You've got the seniors coming up. You might.
No. Never even been close to that level. But regarding the broadcasting end of it, I don't recall a time when I didn't have an interest in it, Ralph. I think maybe when I was 5 or 6 years old or 8, 9 years old. Just something that I was always fascinated in, tuning in games late at night, like I'd mentioned, listening to Bill do the Warriors at night. I listened to Bill as much when I was a kid as Chick Hearn on the Warriors. And then I migrated up the coast. I wound up in – go ahead.
Faked him out of the popcorn machine.
Yeah, and Chick and Bill were real good friends, actually.
And Bill became every bit as good a basketball announcer as Chick Hearn was. Bill was tremendous at that sport. I don't think he did hockey, if I recall.
Hang on, wait a sec here. He actually, in the early days of his career in the Bay Area, and Bill moved to San Francisco in 1958 from the Midwest, he actually worked doing color. There was a legendary hockey announcer named Roy Story in the Bay Area, and
I've heard the name.
Bill did color with him on some of the games of the California Golden Seals in the
I remember them very well.
They were minor league triple hockey team, and Bill actually did some work on their broadcast. So I don't think he ever did play-by-play, but he did color on those games. So But he and Chick were very close because
really?
Bill and Chick Hearn, they back years and years ago in the early 1950s, back in the Midwest, they both broadcast Bradley basketball in Peoria at the same time. It was in the years before exclusivity on radio,
wow.
So you could have 5 or 6 different. I think one year University of Iowa had like 8 stations doing its games. And so Bill and Chick did Bradley at the same time for 2 different stations. And Chick moved to the West Coast a little bit before Bill did.
I would have loved to ask, I'm sure you don't know whether or not Barney Cable played on that Peoria team. He went to Bradley, and he was an All-American. And
played in the NBA.
He played in the NBA. He was my camp counselor at a camp called Kittatinny Camp in the Poconos, and he was just a tremendous guy. And I knew that Bill had done basketball at Bradley, and I don't know if their paths crossed. It was awfully close. I think Cable came out maybe in '59 or so.
Well, they certainly passed in the NBA. They would have passed in the NBA for sure.
Absolutely that. Yes, that. So much you must miss about. What's the number one thing you miss about having him in this world? He died so young and tragically. And what was supposed to be a routine procedure, if I remember correctly, and putting it all into perspective that there are no routine procedures, and we could say your knee this past couple of years and your recovery and how it doesn't always go easy, if anything.
No, that's true. I had a knee replacement in March of 2012. The thing I miss most about Bill is just being a friend. Obviously, I miss him in the booth, although, I've been very fortunate to have Vince Cafronio with me on the A's broadcast for the last 8 years, and Ray Fosse when he's not on television. And I mentioned this in the book, Ralph, there are so many times even now we'd get on the team bus, and I'd look around for Bill, and those are the things you go through when you lose a close friend or a family member, where you just miss that camaraderie. Going out to dinner, because Bill was the greatest dinner companion, I think, in the history of the world, because, he was just, first of all, he had these amazingly eclectic dining tastes and preferences.
He was a Renaissance man. He knew a little bit about everything.
So you want to share things with him. You'd get on the bus or on the plane. We spent so much time together off the air, became very good friends, and so when you have that relationship with someone, you want to share things with them. And so when they're gone, you can't do that. And, that's something that I'll always miss.
Anything that after the book went to bed, as it were, went to press, whatever you want to call it, anything you said, geez, I wish I would have elaborated on this a little. I wish I would have not included that, or maybe explain that. Is there anything you want to clarify?
That's a great question, Ralph, and the answer is, the general answer is no. I gave this book my best shot, and I had great help from the publisher, Steve Ketman, and from Pete Danko, who was the chief editor on the book. So, no, I really felt that I really wanted to look back on this project, because writing a book about Bill King, I think, was kind of daunting and intimidating, because how do you capture Bill? And I look back on it now, sure. When I've read through the book, and I've now read it at least one time all the way through, and I think, maybe I could have done a better job there, or maybe I could have explained something a little differently here or there. But generally, I look back on it, and I really feel like I gave it my best shot. And I'm really proud of the effort. I had a lot of help, not only from, now I have to say this, not only from Steve and from Pete, but from all the people that I interviewed, because the people that I interviewed had such an amazing passion for talking about Bill. And it just speaks to how many lives Bill touched. And the most rewarding thing about once this book became published in early September was hearing from people who've read the book, and the story seems to have resonated, because that was what Bill meant to people. He touched so many lives. And you think of Bill working in the Bay Area for over 45 years. And during that time, just the impact that he had. And maybe this book has rekindled some of that, brought back some of the love that his fans had for him. So that's been the most rewarding thing about this whole process.
You know, that really we can't say any more. That you have no regrets about it, no real regrets about it, and that you gave it your best shot. And sometimes life is that. You do the best you can and you live with the results. In this case, nice job, man. And
thanks, man.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. This was a thrill for me to relive some memories of yesteryear, which is really all we have, is all what we accumulate in our heads to look back upon. And that's what sports are about.
We can look forward to the next ball game and the next season too, can't we?
Yeah, that's nice. Huh? It's a chapter. I think Marty Lurie says that all the time, that each season is a chapter, each month is a chapter in the season, that kind of thing. And
the story gets told every day. The pages get turned every day. I've memorized Marty's entire shtick. So
okay,
I think
you got to give him credit.
Well,
could you imagine being
I
on?
love
could
Marty.
You imagine being
Marty,
on?
I could see if I can give you a brief story, because
right.
Marty and I have been good friends for years, beginning when Marty was working on the A's pregame shows, and it was almost a year ago that I spent a day at Marty's home in Mesa, Arizona, because Marty has this incredible catalog of interviews. And
so you were only there for an hour.
I was there for a day. And he opened his library of interviews to me, and a lot of the stories from Bill, especially his early life broadcasting in the minor leagues, came from some of those interviews that Bill did with Marty. And I transcribed those.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I transcribed those, and so that's where you see a lot of quotes from Bill and stories in Bill's own words in the book. And Marty there were other people that stepped forward. Who just were so generous and gracious. Did you get to
know Leonard Coppett at all?
I knew Leonard very well. Oh, yeah, sure.
He was we have a mutual friend then. Rest in peace, Leonard. I was doing a sports talk show called Sports from the Top of the Hill in the 90s, the mid-90s, and I brought back people from the golden age of baseball: Leonard Coppett, Hank Sauer, Joe DeMaestri, Charlie Silvera, Charlie Fox. And they did interviews with me, and I've kept those, and I became friendly with Len when he moved out in the early 70s. I just call him up on the phone like we're talking now and just talk a little New York ball. He was a great influence on Marty, and he's missed. No
doubt. His son is very prominent. Basically helps run Comcast Sportsnet in the BayArea.
I know he was doing sound for a while. I guess he's...
No, David is one of the executives over there at CSN Bay Area. David Coppett does
wow.
Wonderful job, yeah.
Shows you just how out of touch I am.
But it was great to be with you, man. I really appreciate the time. It was a lot of fun.
You did have fun, and that's you answered my question before. As long as it's fun, that's what it's about. And I hope you come back to these airways very soon.
Okay, Ralph. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Be well. That was Ken Korach of the Oakland A's. Wrote a tremendous book on Bill King, and that's it for today. Remember to keep your humor dry, your dreams wet, your kids off the laps of recruiters of the military variety, and off the laps of clerics wearing dresses. The whole family will benefit from that. Everybody, the whole world will benefit from that. Keep on keeping on. Have a great day.